I'm joined by my guest, Pepe Escobar in Paris. He's an independent geopolitical analyst and author specializing in Eurasia. In Brussels, we have Rivet. He is an independent journalist. And in Kingston, we cross to Gerald Celente. He is founder and director of Trends Research Institute and publisher of the weekly Trends Journal magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Pepe, let me go to you first here. There's a huge asymmetrical process in play here. The Europeans, the West collective, wants to see Russia completely defeated. Russia wants security guarantees. And I have a solution to it. And it's a simple one. Why don't work towards peace? And that's something that the West will never do. Pepe.
Of course not. And they keep saying it every day. Via stultifying Stoltenberg, via American generals, via Antonio Guterres, the sorry Portuguese head of the UN, via Ricci in London. Every day we have a quote or a soundbite from one of these. Of course, not to mention 28,000 or 28 million functionaries in Brussels saying exactly the same thing. Plan A continues on schedule. Plan A is forever war. Plan A is Afghanistan on steroids, at least another 20 years. There's no plan B. So for Russia, they can play it, okay, we can finish this thing in 20 minutes, which they can. Or, okay, all right, let's keep going little by little, inflicting a very refined form of Chinese torture on NATO as a whole and on the US leadership as well. And let's see, one day you're going to cry uncle.
Well, I agree with you. Gerald, let me go to you in Kingston here. This asymmetrical approach here, because this explains how Russia has proceeded in Ukraine, because it wants security guarantees. It's not going to take land that it can't determine its destiny, okay? They're not going to go in and leave. Russia's not going to do this in 5 years, in another 10 years. This is why this is a defining event in this century here. There has to be security guarantees for all, or there'll be security guarantees for none. Go ahead.
You know, this is the American way, as Pepe was saying. Once upon a time, there was a president of the United States by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower, five-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, and two-term president. His farewell address, January 17th, 1961. He warns the American people that the military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children. And that's what America's become. I just turned 76 years old. World War II is in ancient history. Look at all the wars America's been in since then. You like the Korean War? No, I like the Vietnam War. Hey, how about the first Iraq War? No, I like the second Iraq War a lot better. You know, the Afghan war was terrific. It only lasted 20 years. Yeah. Oh, what about what's going on in Somalia? How about the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Barack Obama? I want that guy Gaddafi out of there. I want that guy Assad out of there in Libya, in Syria, Gaddafi in Libya. The United States just passed a defense budget of $858 billion. Yeah. $105 billion of our money now is going to Ukraine. 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. It's the American way, and it's not stopping. This is my magazine from spring 2014. That happy face on there? Washington is driving the world to fight the final war. World hegemony is not a right America has earned. Article written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. And he talks about Washington concluded that Russia needed to be confronted with or distracted by problems that would leave the Russian government less confident or able to counter Washington's aggression elsewhere. Ukraine presented the perfect opportunity for Washington.
Okay, Gerald, on that note, I agree with you. Okay, let me go to Luke here, get everybody in the mix here. Luke, I mean, because the NATO will not discuss Russia's security guarantees, is the reason why we're in this mess in the first place, okay? And as long as they continue to do that, Russia will unilaterally make its own decisions. If it doesn't have an interlocutor, then it will make its decisions on its own, and it will not care what the West says whatsoever, because the West really can't do anything about it, and that's what we've learned. Luke in Brussels, go ahead.
Well, the responsibility of NATO is overwhelming, of course, in the conflict since day one. And of course, we follow America, and Europe should dissociate from America on this. America wants war with Russia. We don't, we shouldn't. And we Europeans are also the victims of this conflict. So we need to define a peace strategy. And we should look, for example, at Turkey. We should look at Hungary, countries where the leaders are responsible people, say, yes, we must do something on the medical front, on the social front and things, but not send arms and be part of that conflict with the plea of Stoltenberg and NATO. We should not do that.
Well, you mentioned the low-octane thinker, Stoltenberg. Let me go back to Pepe here. Well, that's exactly what he is. Okay, has one journalist ever asked him a hard question? Ever? Never. It's never happened, okay? And that's by design. Pepe, you know, Stoltenberg says a victory for Russia is a defeat for the West. Yeah, that's one thing I agree with him on, okay? But of course, NATO is not part of the conflict, okay? I mean, it's absurd what this man says here. But I agree with him. And essentially, it'll be the end of NATO the way if they continue down the path they are. Pepe, go ahead.
Well, of course, nobody knows what the Russian general staff is planning midterm and long term. Nobody, apart from Putin, Patrushev, and maybe Gerasimov and Shoigu. They have a menu which is so juicy in terms of inflicting geopolitical and geoeconomic pain, different levels of the dial on Europe and on the US, which is, you know, you have to laugh about it. And they built this menu. They tried remember what they were trying 1 year ago? Diplomacy. You remember indivisibility of security, right? Those letters sent to the Pentagon and to Brussels. You all remember the non-response response. You all remember what happened next, which was the preparations for a blitzkrieg against Donbass. So we know everything that happened up to the beginning of the SMO. And we also know how Russia has been tweaking the approach towards the SMO, which is now, for all practical purposes, a de-electrification campaign on top of denazification and demilitarization. It's working. And on top of it, they get absolute chaos and panic all across the EU. This is something that you see from outside the EU. I just came back from Brazil, which is in a very sorry state after the Bolsonaro project. And even from Brazil, looking at Europe, you think that Brazil is not that bad.
Well, but Pepe, you bring up a good point. If I could go to Gerald on this one here. I mean, again, after 10 months of the same thing, they continue to double down on it without any kind of... Oh, they claim that Ukraine is winning, which is absurd. I mean, this propaganda in the West is absurd. Ukraine is not winning. Pepe is absolutely right. I would even posit that Ukraine will turn into a failed state before there is a military decision on the battlefield. Gerald, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we said it from the beginning that Ukraine is not going to defeat Russia. I have a famous chart of Napoleon's march to Moscow in 1812, where he leaves Poland with 420,000 troops to attack Moscow and comes back with 10,000. And then there was a thing called World War II, Operation Barbarossa, where the Germans killed some 25 million Russians. And who were the first to defeat the Germans? The Russians. And you mentioned about propaganda. And that's all it is, and that's all it ever is. And all the media does is keep selling it. I just found this a couple of days ago. It's from 1960. This is the headline. Soviet threatens rockets at spy bases. So now we really hate those Soviets, right? You read the article. Remember, this is May 10th, 1960. Premier Nikita Khrushchev warned Monday that Soviet rockets will shoot down any spy planes that venture over Soviet soil, and his government will take appropriate measures. American planes were flying over Soviet territory, and they put a headline in like this. So if Soviet planes were flying over American territory, it would just be fine. Everybody would love it. It's the war machine, period, paragraph. It's been going on, and it's not only destroying the world, it's destroyed this country as well. And it just keeps going on. The propaganda is nonstop.
Let me get Luke in here before we go to the break. But Luke, is the veneer of this propaganda program failing? I mean, now we have protests all through Europe here. I mean, what in the world? The European Union is willing to die on the hill called Ukraine? That's insane. 40 seconds before we go to the break.
Yeah, it is insane. And I would disagree with you when you say that Ukraine could become a failed state. It is a failed state.
Okay, fine.
It's the Muppet Show. Since the end of the Yanukovych era, it's a Muppet Show, the Ukrainian politics. So now we see Zelensky, who was corrupted since 2012 with properties in London, with accounts in the Caribbean, and things that are obviously, what you see in other places. Corruption, really, while he had been elected to fight corruption. So it is a real problem to see that the propaganda in the West is really solid. For all the media that we have here in Western Europe, it is the voice of Kiev.
And that's why we're pariahs, okay? But not, Rumble, we're on Rumble and a few other platforms. We'll get our word out. The hell with YouTube, my opinion. All right, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Ukraine. Go back to Pepe in Paris. You're a prolific writer, and I really appreciate it, and I don't think I ever really miss a column. A couple of days ago, you wrote something, a very long article, very good, but this one sentence really stuck out to me, and I'm going to read it to everybody here. A quick win for Russia would be a loss because NATO would still exist. No, Russia has to pace this so it sucks NATO into the grinder. You're spot on right, Pepe. Why don't you explain what you mean there?
Okay, without using our collective crystal balls, maybe this is scenario number one for the Russian general staff, because they see that in only 10 months it's been working miracles, in fact. So why not 2023, 2024? And now they have indirect confirmation from all sources that the US wants to prolong this thing at least until 2025. Don't forget this contract that Raytheon passed with the American government to supply them with state-of-the-art anti-missile defense. And guess when they're going to deliver that? November 2025. So we have for sure that
Pepe,
I
mean, that begs two things. I mean, will Ukraine still exist? That's up in the air.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Exactly.
But I'm agreeing with you, and let me go to Gerald, because I think it's really important here. Because the Western media likes to frame this as a Russia-Ukraine conflict. Well, it's not that. It's Russia. It's the Western world, NATO world against Russia, and Russia has accepted the challenge. And what I think is in the cards right here. All right, they want to use Ukraine as a cudgel against Russia. Well, Russia will use Ukraine to destroy NATO, and I think that is in the cards. That's one of the reasons why the Russians are taking their time to watch NATO exhaust itself and watch the European Union humiliate itself into bankruptcy. Go ahead, Gerald.
Yes and no, in the sense that America's going to keep the war going. Pepe mentioned Raytheon, or you did. I mean, who is the defense contractor of the United States? Excuse me, the defense secretary, Lloyd Austin. Yeah. What was his last job? Sitting on the board of directors of Raytheon? So they're going to keep this war going as much as they can. Again, it's the military-industrial complex, and I want to make this 100% clear. America is at war with Russia.
Yes.
It's not a proxy war. And these are the words from Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, who said, he told NBC Report that the The reason for U.S. troops in Ukraine was they need, quote, experts in the country to help Ukraine use critical weapons systems. So America is in Ukraine with U.S. troops showing them how to use critical weapons. They're using the critical weapons. If this is not stopped, World War III has already begun, and it's going to annihilate the world in nuclear war. What people don't understand is that you have mentally ill people that are in control, that have a great soul of the demonic, satanic spirit, because there's not one word. You were talking about protests in Europe, zip, nada, nothing in America. Peace is not allowed to be spoken.
Sure.
And we just heard the National Security Advisor, this Jake Sullivan, said, there's no time right now to talk for peace.
Yeah, because victory is not within their grasp. Luke, just the opposite. Victory is staring them in the face, okay? And these missile systems, the Patriot systems, you know, everybody, let's be honest here. The U.S. military has been fighting sheep herders around the world in this century, okay? It's never even close come to a peer power. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now. We're seeing all these expensive weapons that don't work. It's a complete grift, okay? And Luke, I don't care how many American advisors go to Ukraine. They should be aware, because the Russians have eye in the skies. They can see exactly where they are. Luke.
Well, as you say, and the weak arm of NATO, of the alliance, are the Europeans. We are really weak. We don't have ammunition to deliver anymore. I mean, France, the French army, has ammunition for a week of a real war, if there were one. So how could we deliver? They delivered 18 cannons to the Ukrainian army.
And Luke, I'm sorry, Luke, from what I understand, at the beginning of the conflict, there were 200 German tanks and only 10 of them worked.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thanks to Mrs. von der Leyen, who's now the head of the European Commission. You know, she was Minister of Defense for 8 years, and the Bundeswehr, the German army, is in tatters because of her. So that's good news somehow, you know. And the Germans speak about it with a little smile. So
well, Luke, I can guarantee you they spend more money at NATO buffets than they do on German tanks, okay? I can guarantee you that, okay? Pepe, you know, the thing, what you and I have been thinking about, actually in unison over the last few months, I mean, not having direct contact all the time, but we're very much moving in the same direction here. And you know, it's very interesting. Russia is facing the entire onslaught of the West, and the world is watching. And the world is amazed that Russia has taken on the collective West. And it's certainly not losing. I would even say it is winning if you look at what winning means in the long term. Thoughts, Pepe?
Absolutely. 87, 80, 88, 89% of the global South as a whole, and some patches in the global North as well. They have not condemned Russia. They have not sanctioned Russia. And most of them understand Russia's motives. And that's merit, of course, goes to absolutely faultless Russia diplomacy, you know, run essentially by Lavrov, but all the deputy foreign ministers are absolutely brilliant as well. And of course, the hard node, which BRICS, which soon is going to be BRICS Plus, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the strategic partnership between the Russians and the Chinese, and these interlocking partnerships between Russia, China, India, and Iran. What I termed a few weeks ago, the quad that really matters. These are the quad or across the region that really matter. So in terms of soft power globally, Russia has got it because they managed to explain their position. The thing is, they cannot, in fact, finish this war in 20 minutes because this would be a remix of American Shock and Awe.
Yeah.
And that's not what Russia wants. Russia wants the global South on their side. So it has to be little by little this form of Chinese torture, which is strategic ambiguity in the words of the Russian General Staff. And the global South bought it. They are on board because they understand that Russia now is at the vanguard of this fight against the hegemon. And if Russia wins...
And Pepe, you know, the global South, they remember the European colonial experience. Let's not forget that. The Russians weren't there, but the Europeans were. Okay, Gerald, this war is not going to end in diplomacy. It's not going to end in negotiations because from the Russian perspective, there's no one to trust in the West. Angela Merkel's admission recently, Petro Poroshenko, the former Ukrainian president, they lied. They're liars. So there's going to be no negotiated end to this. It will be unilaterally decided by Russia because there's no one to trust in the West. Gerald.
Yes, so what you said about Merkel and Poroshenko, that they admitted that the Minsk agreement was a total fraud just to get Ukraine built up stronger so they could fight against the Russians. Here, I'm a trend forecaster. We have a system called globalnomics. We're talking right now about, you know, war. So we look at many different fields, and one of them, of course, is to look at is what's going on with the global economy. So, of course, with the sanctions they put on Russia, you know, energy prices are going up. There's a lot of hardship in Europe. That's why you're seeing the demonstrations. One of my sayings is, when all else fails, they take you to war. We are facing a geopolitical, socioeconomic crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before, that have been brought about by all the cheap money they pumped into the system when they fought the COVID war. So let's go back to a thing called the Great Depression. What followed it? World War II. What followed the dot-com bust? Oh, you mean the war on terror? What I'm saying is that when the economy crashes, they get the people's mind off it with war. And they're going to do the same thing now. American people, when I was a kid, they had us hiding under a desk because the Russians were going to drop an atom bomb.
I remember.
They're doing the same thing now.
I remember.
So what I'm saying is they're going... A Russian missile just landed in Poland and killed 2 people. Dun, 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 NATO has to unite. Do you see how quick it happens? How they believe it? Oh, 2 people? Well, they killed 377,000 over there in Yemen. Now, we don't care about Yemen. But anyway, what I'm saying to everyone is that when all else fails, they take you to war. The global economy is failing, and they will get the people's minds off the misery with war.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Luke, in your crystal ball here, I won't hold it to you, but we're coming to the end of this year. By the end of next year, how many governments do you think in the European Union will fall? I won't hold you to it.
Very possibly several. It's not only a falling government, it's also a majority that would crumble, and the opinions within the European Union that would change. You know, we have issues at the European Parliament with corruption by Qatar and things. And we see that these people at the European Parliament have great ideas about ethics and morality, but they're awful. So it's going to get worse in Europe. And the problem also is that I see a depression in the future, certainly, but America in the meantime is cynically making a lot of money with the European stupidity, sending us their LNG, destroying the European economy, and making that the euro will never be a currency of reserve anymore.
It all gets down to, we'll end on this, it all gets down to being ideologically obsessed and greedy, okay? Oh, and hubris, absolutely taking no responsibility for their actions. That's where we end this year, gentlemen. That's all the time. I want to thank my guests in Paris, Brussels, and in Kingston.